go. And Assad has some really cool stuff to show off and get feedback on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him.
Well, thank you, Sean. So what I wanted to show today is this new capability in the platform that helps you create copies or duplicate code workbooks as a mechanism of sharing code or using someone else's code with as a starting point for an analysis. And then I want to put it in the context of all the other code sharing mechanisms that we have and knowledge management and the knowledge store, and kind of give a refresher on the state of the world of what's possible to do, what are the current features, where to find documentation and where to find help. And obviously, we're always open to feedback. So if you have any questions during the presentation or any feedback, just let me know. After this presentation, I will either today or Monday send an announcement with the most up-to-date documentation for all the processes that I'm going to discuss today. So I was hoping for a little bit of feedback today before fleshing out the documentation. So let me share my screen and I will start with that. Can you see my screen, the homepage?
Yep.
Great. So maybe what I will do is let me start with the case where you look at the knowledge store and some of the knowledge objects being shared by another researchers in N3C has some example workbooks. And maybe you don't want to use the code workbook templates because you want to customize a lot more than what the template allows you to do. One way to kind of go around that is to just create a copy of the example workbook in the knowledge store. So if I go to the knowledge store here, so here, as you can see, there is a list of all the shared knowledge objects that people have shared within the enclave after working on them in their respective research projects. There's some additional filters if you haven't seen this in a while, and some of them are whether we've added a peer review functionality, so you can maybe just if you want to see just the knowledge objects that have been peer reviewed and look at the corresponding review comments, you can use this. In the knowledge store, and I know I'm kind of like deviating a little bit from what I wanted to show, but just as a reminder, typically the things that are being shared are either code workbook templates for people who work in the code workbook application, Python libraries, for people who develop code in code repository and then they want to package their libraries and share them with other users. But you can also share cohort definitions. You can share just simple documentation or other derived data sets. These are kind of like the common types supported. Let me take an example. And this is one knowledge object that was published recently by Andrea. I think Andrea is here in the call. I hope you don't mind me using your knowledge objects as an example. When you click on it, this is an example of a knowledge object where you have a number of things being shared. There is the code workbook template, which basically, if you open it from here, you can look at the logic that has been packaged. And you can choose to import that template in your local code workbook and rerun it. So this is on the right side, a high-level definition of the template. And then if you click on the nodes, this is a more complex template. You can look at the code that is being shared. The nice thing about this is you can add it to a code workbook and run it as is, or you can add it to a workbook and then change the input data sets and run your code. And there's some additional features about choosing, related to choosing which version of the data you want to run, which branch, etc. So maybe the limitation of reusing the template is that the template has some structure, and maybe you just want to copy the code locally to learn from it or make some substantial changes. And so you don't want to import the template and just change the inputs or just change some of the nodes. And so in some cases, just like in this knowledge object, the author has also shared some example code workbooks. So these workbooks are in read only, but you can click on them and then explore the code to either learn from it or copy some pieces of it to your local research project. So I can click on each one of these nodes, and then if I click on toggle view, I can see the code back in this node. So this workbook is in read only, meaning that you cannot, it's basically maintained by the knowledge object author and you cannot modify it. But you can create, and this is the new thing now, is you can create a copy of it, and that copy is something that you can change as you wish. So if you scroll down here, you can see there's some information about how to use the code template shared, which is basically these shared logic in here. This one is with LDS. This one is with the identified inputs. And in case there is a code workbook being shared, you'll also see these instructions here explaining how to use this example workbook. And one of the ways to use it is to just create and duplicate it. And so there is a link here called the code workbook duplicator. I may actually maintain this, open it in a separate tab. That's one way to get to the application, and there's another way which I'll show in a bit, which is in the data catalog. But if you click on this code workbook duplicator and you we look at it from here, it's quite simple to use. You have some instructions here, but it's very straightforward. Basically, you pick the code workbook that you want to duplicate. You select a destination folder where you want to save your copy. You give a name to your copy, and then you pick a branch. So the nice thing about this is that you can choose to duplicate the master branch, or if the workbook has other branches, you can actually copy these branches instead of master. So I'm gonna demo how it works, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the caveats here. So let's say I wanna pick Andrea's workbook, which I have it open here. If you open it from just one way to find it quickly on the search is if you open the folder where the code workbook is saved, you can grab the location of the code workbook here. And so if I go back to the code workbook duplicator, instead of looking for the code workbook, I can just directly pass the path. And this should find my template, my code workbook. So if I hit select, this is the code workbook selected, the one I want to create a copy of. Let's do a destination folder. Let's choose a destination folder. And so suppose in your case, it will be your research project, the one that you have access to. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just gonna pick the same destination, which is this, the same folder where the original one lives, just because I cannot show other directories of researchers. But this is basically, you just go here to all projects, and then you look for your research project. So if it's this one, neurological post-acute sequela of COVID-19, you go here and then you select a subfolder if you want to. In my case, I'm just going to go to this subfolder here. and then I will select this folder. And let's just give it a name. I will call this one copy EUG example workbook. And then this one, it has 3 branches, so I can choose to copy the master. Yes.
But just beware of the, we're in a public forum, so be careful of.
Oh, yes, sorry about that. Thanks for the reminder. So I'll avoid showing individual nodes. So let's say I'm picking the master branch here. And you hit duplicate. Depending on the workbook, it might take a few seconds. This one is kind of large. It has multiple nodes, and it also has templates. So there's a lot of things that needs to be copied and created in this folder. But eventually you'll see a toaster that message that is like a success message when this finishes running. So we'll just give it a couple seconds, a few seconds.
If someone were to not realize that and close the tab, would it continue to do the copy?
Yes, it will. Unless there are cases where it will fail. And these cases I will discuss. Actually, I can start discussing them now. But you can go to the knowledge store and copy the example workbooks here in your research project. If your research project is approved for de-identified and you try to copy the LDS workbook, it will not work and you will receive an error message because, oops, I just missed the green success message, but it sounds like it's finished when I was showing the, I'll show it with another example with no template so that it goes faster. But as you can see here, and I'll finish answering your question, Sean, in a bit. You see here my copy. And so I will open and zoom out. And so as you can see, it's going to be exactly, if I click here, it will just show the template interface. It's going to be exactly the same copy as the original workbook. And this is your local copy, so you can rerun the nodes. You will create local copies of the input data sets, and you can continue working on this. What I was saying is, if you try to copy an LDS, a workbook which has LDS data into a project that is only approved for de-identified, you'll receive an error message. Obviously, you can only copy workbooks in locations that have the same data tiers. So that's one of the main limitations here. Let me show another example with a simpler example workbook that I have here, which has notional data. And this one doesn't have templates. And so the reason I want to show it is just to show you another way to find the application that performs the duplication. This is just an example workbook with some basic R and Python code that is in a shared location. So if you go to the homepage, just in case you're not in the knowledge store, if you go to the data catalog, there is usually you go to the data catalog to grab LDS tables or de-identified tables or synthetic data. But there's also this collection here called dashboard and apps, where you have things like the concept says browser, the knowledge store, even though this is exposed from the homepage. You also have a link to the code workbook duplicator. So this will take you to this duplicator app that I was showing. And again, here, let's grab the path for this examples workbook so that I can copy it. So let's select the workbook, destination folder. Let me just put it in the example, some project that I can show, maybe this example project, and grab this location. Yeah, let's just save it here. And let's call it second copy EUG example. And let me pick the master branch. Now let's hit duplicate. It'll take a few seconds or maybe a minute. And then you'll have the workbook available in the destination folder, which is this one. So just to finish on the limitations, if you are a researcher and you're approved to work on 2 different research projects, if these research projects are of the same data tier, meaning de-identified and de-identified, you can copy workbooks between these two and between these 2 projects. That's totally fine. And that will work. And typically that's helpful because people do some work on a specific research project and then they start a new project. So as you can see here, this is the message that appears when the duplication is done. And if I go here and I refresh, you will see this second copy here. And so if I click on it, you'll see exactly the same nodes as the original one with the same code. The data will be empty, meaning that you need to rerun the code to produce your results. But at least all the nodes are created, all the code is there, so you don't have to recreate them manually. Or you don't have to like create a template and then import the template in another project, because that also takes some time. And so what I was saying is, if you're approved on 2 research projects and they're of the same data tiers, and you try to copy one workbook from one project to another, this will work. If say you're approved on a level 3 LDS research projects and a level 2 de-identified research projects, and you try to copy a workbook between the 2 projects, this will not work, and you will receive an error message saying that it's an operation that is not possible. And that is for governance purposes. It's to prevent you, for example, from accidentally bringing in LDS data sets into a level 2 workbook. And even though you're approved to see LDS data, maybe your collaborators aren't. And so that's kind of like a safe to prevent from that situation.
Hey, so
yes.
It looks like the input data sets are sort of copied over too. Are intermediate data sets copied over?
Great question. So input data sets are copied. Intermediate data sets, you will see them as just nodes that you need to rerun. And so that will create your local copies of these data sets. So derived data sets in a project will not be copied. The nodes will be copied, and so you can rerun the code. But the data sets themselves, unless they're input data sets, and these are the data sets that you import to your workbook, unless they're input data sets, they will not be copied. And then the other thing is that these input data sets have to be one of the data sets that are in the data catalog. So the data sets that are approved to be used everywhere in all other research projects of LDS or de-identified access, meaning that if you have a derived data set that you created yourself in your project, and then you import it in another workbook and try to duplicate that workbook in a separate project, that will not work unless you submit that data set to the knowledge store. The knowledge store is the only mechanism to make something, whether it's a templates or a workbook or a data set shareable outside of your research project. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Excuse me, Saad, could I ask one related question?
Sure.
If you're wanting to copy a workbook from a workbook that was developed in a project at level 2,
Yes.
but you'd like to use it in a project of level 3, seems to me that should be allowed because you're not, you know, the destination has higher clearance than the source. So that seems to me should work, but does it work?
It doesn't, but it could work if you request help to, the problem with that is that you're gonna be importing data sets that are level 2 in a level 3 project, which in theory should be fine because level 3 is just more access. I think in so far, the way we've been treating them and governance have been treating them as like separate, either you have level 2 or level 3, and you cannot bring in level 2 data sets into level 3 by default. However, that's something that you can just submit an issue and request help for, and we can help. The other thing you can do is you can maybe copy, I'm trying to think of the best way. Obviously, one of the ways to do that is to create a template, and then you can import the template in your level 3 data set, because template is just code. So it will import the nodes, but it will not import the data sets.
Right.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Right. Okay. So I think what you just said is, if that's what you want to do, you can forget the duplicator, or you can ask for help with the duplicator, or you can just fall back on previously existing mechanisms like code template.
Yeah, you can still use the duplicator, but there's an additional step, which is that you have to request that some level 2 data sets are approved to be used in that level 3 project, which I think shouldn't be a problem, but this is something that is not done by default. But we can bring in level 2 data sets into a level 3 project. And then because they're approved, you can use the duplicator and it will work. And then we can then replace them with level 3 data sets and then remove the references. So there's like kind of like an extra 1 or 2 steps involved in case you're moving something from a level 2 project to a level 3 project.
Hey, Saad.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Is it possible, like if I removed the input data sets and sort of left them as unspecified and sort of unbroken transforms, could I copy the workbook that way and then just respecify them on the destination?
I think so. I think that will work. You can also create dummy input nodes, like from a manual entry. So like, say you have a condition occurrence data set that is level 2, create a manual entry and then hook it to the derived transformations, delete condition occurrence, and then copy the workbook. That's totally fine. It's one way to do it quickly without requiring our help. And once you have it in your level 3 project, you can, but yeah, that's a good point and a good idea, Sean. If you get rid of the level 2 data sets that are inputs and you copy the workbook, then it's totally fine, because what you're copying is just nodes and code. You're not copying data. Does that make sense?
Hey, Saad, this is
Yes.
Mina.
Hi.
So as I understood, you said initially that in the code workbook duplicator, the workbook is not, you cannot change things. It's just read only. So when you're saying you can input a dummy Can you do that? Like if you can't change anything in the code duplicator, workbook duplicator, can you?
Yeah, so let me clarify. That's a good question. What I was talking about initially are example workbooks that are published in the knowledge store. These ones belong to their author. So in this case, Andrea, they're the maintainers of the workbook. And the use case here is you trying to duplicate a level 3 workbook of that is published by Andrea in your research project. That is level 3, or use the level 2 workbook and duplicate it in your research project. So in this case, these workbooks are read-only and you cannot modify them because they belong to their authors, and they're here just as an example for you to look at in the knowledge store, or as something that you can copy, create a local copy in your project. And the local copy, obviously, you can change. The second use case I was talking about is if you're trying to duplicate your own code workbook, something that you've created in one research project, and you're trying to create a copy in a separate research project that you're working on. That's when you can modify, obviously, the source workbook because it belongs to you, and then you can create a copy of it. Does that make sense and clarify?
Yeah, yes, thank you so much. For a moment, I was lost. Thanks so much.
Yes, sorry for the complication comes from these stringent governance rules that impose that things cannot move between research projects, which is why a lot of what we're building are to be compliant with these rules, but still make it hopefully easy for people to reuse their work in other places or share their work with other researchers. Any other questions? So feel free to interrupt me, but just to finish a little bit on some of the caveats, there is one use case where the duplication will fail, and this is just because the feature is not developed yet. And that's when your workbook, let me just switch to a branch that is editable here and show you what I'm talking about. So the workbook will be copied whether it has templates or not. And if it has templates, the template will also be carried over. But if you have something like this, where you have a transformation, and the transformation is actually, let me start from here, this has data. The transfer, let's see, maybe I'll start from this. Yeah, there you go. So from this table, I can create an R transformation, a Python SQL. I can use templates, or I can use contour visualizations for people familiar with contour. So these are easy ways to plot charts without writing code. And so I can say something like, give me a histogram. And these are basically features that are available in contour. So I can say plot survived. I guess this should be in the y-axis. And then let's say I want to plot the unique count of survived people. I'm not even sure if this graph is relevant, but this is another one of the types of transformations that you can have in Code Workbook, is the ability to create charts without writing code, and these are called contour charts. That's the only, when you have a Code Workbook that has a contour chart, the duplication will fail because it does not support this type. It supports everything else like Python, R code, SQL, templates, but this is not yet supported. And so your duplication would fail. So my recommendation is to remove the charts if you want to duplicate a workbook and then add them after. This is something that will get better in the future, and this should be supported, but right now it's something that you have to work around. So that's caveat number 2. Number 1 is the data access, copying between research projects of different level of data access. Number 2 is contour charts. And number 3, what I mentioned here is that like The thing with duplicating a code workbook is you're creating your own copy, but it's different than branching, meaning that if you make changes to your copy, you cannot push them back to the original code workbook. So if your goal is to collaborate on a code workbook with other people or to do incremental changes and push them back, my recommendation would be to use branches and create new branches. So for example, here a dev branch, and you can make changes and then merge them back to master. That's kind of a different use case, collaborating and doing change management. So copying is mostly to kind of like just have your code, the code somewhere else, maybe make some changes to it, maybe learn from it, but it's not a robust workflow when it comes to changes. And then number two is like, and this is what templates is generally better at, is if you create a local copy of your workbook and then the original, the source code workbook changes, you will not see the reflected changes in your copy. So your copy is completely separate. There is a way to track provenance, so we can track provenance and we can figure out attribution, but your copy will not take the new changes that come from the original code workbook, which is why for these cases, we recommend using code workbook templates. And I think this link takes you to the documentation for people that are not familiar with it. An example of a template is what I was showing here, is just a way to package the code in an interface where you can write the code here and then parameterize the inputs to be able to rerun them. And so the good thing about templates is if the author of the template makes an update, you will see a warning and you will have the option to upgrade to the latest version or keep the version you're working on. And that is not the case when you're just literally just copying a code workbook. So these are the main, I guess, key differences between using branching, using a code workbook template, and then using just the copying the duplication feature. Any questions about that?
Hi, this is Mina again.
Hi, Mina.
Hey, so what you're saying is you will, even if you have duplicated a code workbook from a knowledge store, and you've made substantial changes, you've used the template but made changes and have your own data and things like that, you will get an updated notification of the original template from the, like, if there is an update to the underlying template. Is that what you're saying?
If you use this field, shared logic, which is the code workbook template, then yes.
Okay.
Because the way it would look like is you're running code that someone else has produced, maybe on different inputs. But if that code changes, you will see a warning asking you whether you want to upgrade to the latest version and rerun the code, or if you want to keep the current version. This will break if you convert the template into a code. And so, for example, I'm trying to find the template I was looking at here. So this is a template. If, for example, Andrea updates this everyone conditions of interest code, it will not update automatically in my workbook, but I will see a warning here saying that I'm not using the latest version of the code, and do I want to be using the latest version, or do I want to keep doing that? But if I choose to, if I import the template and then there is this action here which converts it to just a code transform, then I will lose that ability to pick up new changes. And then additionally, if I don't use, if I go back here, if I don't use the template, the shared logic, and instead I just copy the code workbook using this code workbook duplicator, then it's basically just like copy pasting code somewhere else. It doesn't retain any updates that if this changes, then my copy will not pick up the changes, and I will have my own code and I can do changes to it independent on this original example workbook. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, sir.
So just to clarify, Saad, so you meaning when you copy a code workbook that has a template in it, the destination loses the template and it just has the code?
No, so that is a special use case, and that's a good point, Sean. If you copy because the example workbook doesn't always have a template.
Sure.
So if it doesn't have a template, then there's no way to know whether the source code changed. If it does have a template, the template is also copied. And in that case, unless you change it to a code transform, you can see when a template is updated and choose to update or not. So that's a good clarification, Sean. Thanks for pointing that out. It's mostly because I'm not assuming that this example workbook always has a template in it. It could have a template and it could not just have code, which is why shared logic is to be treated differently than example workbooks. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool.
I like your idea of like, putting in placeholder data with the manual entry stubs that could then be, sort of replaced at the destination end. So then in theory, we wouldn't have to have separate versions for every different data level or every different data access.
In theory, yes. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I wonder if it'd be possible to, instead of having to open up the duplicator and select the workbook, it would be possible to generate a link where the workbook is already selected and you just have to set the destination?
Yes, the short answer is yes. If you remember, we had that in the, if you remember the old version of the concept set editor that was here, there was a tab where you could click on the tab and you already have the current concept set loaded. And so you can just add your additional inputs and run the editor. We can do the same thing here, and it would be easy to do to add an additional tab where you have the example code workbook already loaded, and all you need to do is select a destination and pick which branch you want to duplicate. That's absolutely the case. We didn't do it yet because we wanted to figure out whether, say you have two workbooks, which one do you select? But we could actually parameterize that and have a drop down. But yes, I think that's a good suggestion, and we can definitely do that. I think I forgot. So the first part of your question, Sean, which is theoretically we shouldn't need to have pinned inputs. So two versions, one for LDS and one for the identified. That is true, and it makes it easy to publish something quickly. But say you have a workbook with many OMOP tables, like literally all of them. It's just basically extra work for the consumer of the template to import all these tables, which is why we have the option here to publish them with LDS inputs already attached, so they don't have to re-upload, import them themselves. And you will notice here in the knowledge objects, sometimes it says shared logic with LDS inputs. Sometimes I believe it just says, just gonna pick something else. This one is just shared logic, meaning it doesn't really depend on the type of input data sets, and this one might not have pin tables. But yes, does that make sense and answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Cool. I think I have 15 more minutes. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of submitting things to the knowledge store and updating them. But feel free to stop me if you still have questions about the code workbook duplicator or about any of the things I'm discussing here. So like I said, the knowledge store exists because it's a within the N3C environment, you can only do work within your research project, and it's hard to move resources to resources being code workbooks, data sets, and code to other research projects for other people to benefit from them. Because of governance requirements and trying to limit the risk of copying data that is not approved in other projects. And so the knowledge store is a mechanism to publish shared logic, something that you've developed in your research projects, but publish it in a central place that is a shared location that where other people can borrow your work and reuse it. And most of the time, this work is in the form of a code workbook template or a Python custom library. Sometimes it's a data set, but oftentimes it's these two types. And so here, say you have trying to find a good template to, maybe I'll just use this one as an example to share. So let me go back here. Say you've developed a template in your research project or a Python library and you want to publish it to the knowledge store. You click on this new knowledge object, which is, we call that the knowledge store upload form. I just wanted to walk you through the process because sometimes it's so confusing for people. You can pick the research project from which you're working on and from which the knowledge object originated from. In this case, and I will delete the knowledge object right after, but just for the sake of the example, I'm going to pick logic liaison team because this is where this template originated from. I can give it a title. Let's call it EUG example to delete. This is an example template to share. Category is more like whether is it a template that creates visualizations? Is it a template that creates derived variables? Is it a concept set related template, a cohort template, or is it maybe none of these, in which case you just put it as uncategorized? This category is helpful for people looking into the knowledge store and trying to figure out what's available. They can maybe choose to just look at the utility templates in here. And you will see the semantic similarity Python library. I can use to maybe look at just the visualization templates, and I can see the corresponding knowledge objects. So it's more to make it easy for people to find your shared logic when you apply this category. OMOP domains is also just for documentation purposes. Say your knowledge object, say your template uses the condition occurrence table as one of its inputs and maybe also the device exposure table. You can tag them here, and that's also a mechanism to search for your templates. And then here the type, which is something that we added recently to clarify what is it that you are submitting. Are you submitting a code workbook template, which is the case here? This is a code workbook template. Let me go back to, are you submitting instead a Python library, which is a library that you can develop in a code repository as opposed to a code workbook? Or is it simply some documentation report or a cohort definition? The two first ones are the most common ones. So you select the tabs. You can choose if you want to add some tags that also will make the template easy to find. And these are tags that are also used in the N3C community notes. So you can, they can help you find things that are related from the platform. Maybe in a separate session, I can show how to use a knowledge graph to find things that have a common tag, from training modules to community notes to templates. But say maybe in this case, I'm using condition occurrence. So I'm gonna tag condition occurrence here. I'm using Python in this. I think there is a Python or PySpark tag. So I can add these tags. Once I do that, I'm ready to submit the knowledge object to the knowledge store. it will not appear immediately in the knowledge store. Initially, it's considered as unreleased, and there is some work to be done to make it released and publish it. But this basically, oh yeah, sorry. The most important thing which I forgot, which is to select the actual thing that I want to share. And so let me go to grab the template from here. Let me grab the location. That's easier to find than looking at the folder tree. And so this is the thing I want to share. This is the code workbook template I want to share. And then I can hit submit. And what this does is that it basically tells you that it's a request that has been created and that the support team will look at to release your knowledge object to the knowledge store. And as you can see here quickly, I had a notification as an admin that a new knowledge object has been created. And so what we do internally is that this template that you're trying to create here is typically in your research projects. In order for it to be visible and share and usable by other people outside of your research project, it has to be moved to a shared location. And that shared location is usually some projects called knowledge object shared logic. So typically what we do in the background is we move the template or whatever you want to share to this shared location that other people can access. We grant you edit access to this so that you can continue maintaining it and add into it. And then once we do that, then we mark the knowledge objects as released. And when it's released, you will see it from the list of knowledge objects in here. And so once it's released, you'll also receive an email notification saying it's released. I think typically it takes us about 24 hours, maybe 48 hours to release your knowledge object. We also make sure that technically there is no issue, that we try to test it on our side and rerun it and make sure that it runs properly. So there's some quality checks to be done before it's shown here. Now, the thing that is kind of new is once you have a knowledge object that is released in here in the knowledge store, typically when you submit it first, you mostly submit the shared logic. But let's say after that, you want to add things like a documentation, a README folder, you want to add an example workbook, you want to add maybe some data sets that you want to share. The way to do that is there is this request here to add a new resource to the knowledge object. So if initially you only share the template and you want to add new things to attach to this, you just click on this button here. And then you select the resource type. You say, oh, I want to add an additional data set to be shared, or I want to add a documentation. You select for documentation. I think there's no, it's valid for all data tiers, but let's say I select a template. I can specify whether it's something that works with synthetic data, with only de-identified, with LDS, or if it's valid for all data set inputs. And then here you just kind of like pass in the URL of the things so that you want to share. So let's say I want to add maybe this, suppose this is the URL for a data set. I can just copy this and paste it directly into here. And then if you want to add some additional notes to us that we should be aware of, you can add them here. Once you do that, that sends a request to us, and then we action on it, and then your knowledge, your additional resource is attached, and you receive an automated email notification saying that the thing that you attached is up to date. So that's a new thing. There are other things you can do by yourself, such as changing the title if you want to change it. You can only do that, obviously, if you're the author or maintainer. You can change the title, you can change the description. So for this, you don't necessarily need our intervention to do that. You can change the category of the knowledge object. You can change its type, say if it was a mistake and it's actually a Python code repository. You can add additional tags, and then as an author, you can change the author or maintainer of the knowledge objects. The only thing that requires like an intervention, and this is why this is a request and not just directly a change, is because this is additional, adding a request to add an additional resource. So for example, a data set that requires us to move that resource to a shared location and then apply the proper permissions to allow people to view it and to allow you to keep editing it from that shared location, which is why this is kind of a request and not an immediate thing that happens. Any questions about this? What I showed here is mostly for maintenance of existing knowledge objects and continuously updating them. Any questions about this? So if not, maybe two last things. One is, as a consumer, as someone who has access to the knowledge store, you have the ability to look at this knowledge object and maybe add a peer review. Say add a review here, and it could be anything that you want, but typically it's something like, oh, I've inspected this code and it performs as expected, or it does what it says, what the description says it does. And you can see here, for example, in this knowledge object, has been 2 reviews already, and you can actually open them and see more details about what the review does. So it's just something that gives you a little bit more confidence, maybe on the things that are being shared. So you can see here this review comment. This is a short one that's been submitted Wednesday, April 27th. And this also helps you kind of like find things if you want to look at only the reviewed ones. Right now, there are not that many, but that functionality exists. The other thing that you'll have is that, say I select, there's only so far one custom Python library being published, but there will be probably more in the future. But if you open this, you'll see that the instruction will change. We have added instructions on how to use a template, on how to use a Python library, a shared Python library. And this instruction depends on the type of shared logic, obviously. The way to use a custom Python library is not the same way you would use a template. And so this one is a specific instruction that tells you, okay, if you want to use this shared Python library in a code repository in your research project, you should check out this guide. If you want to import it in your code workbook, you can do the customization and add it. Basically, the instructions vary depending on the type of the thing being shared. It was my main point here. So hopefully this will help clear out a little bit the confusion and help people understand how to use the shared logic that is being published here. Going to stop here because it's 15:09 and I said most of the things I wanted to say. Are there
a question in the chat?
Yeah.
Saad, there's a question in the chat.
I was asking what's the difference between a cohort template and an object type cohort there? Because there's a code template and cohort. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so cohort definition is I think it's modeled as a JSON string, and you can use that with some specific code or templates to derive a cohort in your code workbook. So it's not directly code, but it's like a JSON string that you can use. And we have some templates that use that take this JSON cohort and then creates an actual table with the cohorts. I think if I search for
we can insert JSON code into our code workbook?
Yes, there's needs to be some code to parse it, and we have some templates that do that. But for example, this is what I'm not even sure how to pronounce this, but this is how this cohort looks like. And so if I look at version 2, it's basically this JSON string. And so this is something that you can, with the use of another code workbook template, you can run this cohort in your code workbook. So maybe in a separate session, I can cover how this is done. And I can also send out some documentations to explain how this is done.
Yeah,
It's
that's
been
nice.
less
It's
used
like
than
Atlas.
other things.
We can use Atlas tools or something like that to build it then. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think some of we have some templates that kind of like mimic Atlas functionality and help you interact with like some Atlas functionality.
Oh, great. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? It's obviously not used as much as other types, but it's possible to publish and use if that's what you want to do.
It does seem like the Odyssey cohort definition is rather well thought out. So yeah, being able to make more use of that would be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Saad.
No problem. I hope this was helpful. And if you have feedback, you can either say it now or send follow-ups. We're happy to take in that. And as a follow-up, I'll send some links to the documentation for this process and for the new tool.
Thanks for the new feature. It's great. We've all been excited about that. So thank you. We'll use it.
No problem.
Thank you, Saad.
Bye, I guess.